Good morning. How's everybody doing today? You guys can smile. It's all right. I know, you're like, okay, this is odd. This is different. It's a little bit weird, and that's okay. Just to go ahead and accept the awkwardness and the difference, and it's part of it, and that's all right. So today, I say welcome. My name is Aaron, and I'm glad that you're here today. Obviously, we had a few technical difficulties with different things that we weren't expecting. As part of doing live streaming, I was telling somebody earlier that from the time that COVID started until today, we literally have redone our entire sound system, and all we didn't have cameras, so we redone all of that. We borrowed cameras for the first 2.5 months, and so all this is very new to a lot of different people. And so you guys that are online, thank you for being with us. For everybody in the room, we're glad to see your faces as well. You can smile. It's good. I'm glad to see you today and glad that you're here. We're in a new series called Running with the Giants, and just being honest, as we go through this series, we're going to look at some different people, different giants of faith in the Bible, and we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 as our key verse for this series. And I'm going to invite Jacob up. He's going to come up, and for all the kids in the room, you got to watch Jacob because he's going to show you some motions for this verse. And if you'll learn these motions in the next few weeks, you can be right here where Jacob's at doing these motions, all right? So you're watching Jacob, all the kids in the room, and all the kids online, make sure you're watching Jacob. Here we go. Hebrews 12:1 says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." Should we do that one more time so everybody gets to see it? All right, so one more time. One more time. All right, here we go. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." All right, so kids, there you go. There's your challenge. You got to learn that verse over the next few weeks, and then you're going to be up here on stage doing it with us, all right? Parents, if you want to challenge your kids to do that, that's totally awesome, and maybe we'll have a parent in our kids' corner in the next few weeks as well, showing off for their kids. So Hebrews 12:1 is our key verse for this series, and as we talk through this series, we're going to be talking about different giants of the faith, different people that ran before us. And I'm just curious, how many of you guys have ever ran a race? You've run a race at some point in time in your life? I hate running. Anybody else in the room, you just despise it? It's terrible? Yes, thank you so much. I'm with you. I hate it. The only thing worse than running is running without a crowd. Why do we do that? I get that you got to exercise, but running with no one cheering you on is way worse than just running on a track with people cheering you on. Maybe you never were a runner, but maybe you played sports, and playing sports is awesome, but whenever you have a crowd full of people, packed full of people, it makes it so much better. The louder, the better, the more energy, all those things. And so I was thinking about this, and the crowd adds to the adrenaline, if you know what I'm talking about. It just adds a level of adrenaline. And I was thinking about all this, and I started looking at, I'd seen some things with some overseas soccer clubs and things like that. They're playing soccer games right now in a lot of different countries, and they're playing them with no fans in the stands. So they actually added cardboard cutouts to the stands so that it wouldn't feel so awkward for people. We did not do that while you weren't here. Don't worry. We didn't add your cardboard cutouts out here. We didn't do that. But there are lots of different soccer clubs doing this. So they're going to show you a picture on the screen, and that looks like people. But those are actually cardboard cutouts. This is a soccer game in Germany a couple weeks ago. They're all cardboard cutouts. And if you're thinking, oh, that's crazy. This week, the Oakland A's baseball team, they're going to start playing games in 2 weeks from today, or 2 weeks from this week. And they announced this week that you can purchase a seat for your cardboard cutout this season to be in the stands at the Oakland A's games. And I thought to myself, who in their right mind would purchase a seat for their cardboard cutout? But apparently there's a lot of people not in their right minds, and they're doing it. And so if that's you and you're like, that would be kind of cool. I told Jacob, the only way I would do it would be if I was purchasing advertisement. That would be the only way. Outside of that, I don't think I would pay. If it was a free thing, maybe, but I don't know. It just seems kind of odd, right? But there's something powerful about having people cheer you on. There's something powerful about having people watch you whenever you're competing. And so even our professional sports teams, they realize this. They're talking about actually pumping fan noise and fan cheering into the stadiums that all these events are going to be played at because of how important it is and how much it raises the level of competition when there's people cheering you on. It's interesting. When we look at this verse in Hebrews 12, verse 1, and throughout this series, we're going to be talking about this idea of a huge crowd of witnesses. What's the author of Hebrews telling us? He's saying, hey, there is a huge crowd of witnesses. All the people that have come and run the race before us, they're now in heaven. And these people that are in heaven, they're cheering you on. They're witnessing you. They're witnessing the baton that you have in your hand running, and they're cheering us on. And so as we look through this series, we're going to look at a couple different people that are in the stands now. They're cheering us on. And we're just going to pretend for a moment that they're watching us run through a very difficult season of a race. And they're going to come down out of the stands, and they're going to come down onto the track, and they're going to put our arms around us, and they're going to give us some words of wisdom. And so today, as we talk about our first kind of giant of the faith, we're going to look at the person that is maybe considered the father of faith. His name is Abraham. And Abraham, if he were to come out of the stands today and put his arm around us, I think he'd have some words of wisdom for us. I think he would say a couple of specific things to us, and he would help us be able to understand a little bit about running this race. And so the big idea for today is God always does the right thing. And I think if Abraham were to come down out of the stands and put his arm around us today, I think he would say, hey, even when you don't understand it, God's doing the right thing. And how would Abraham know that? We're going to look at 4 stories really quick of Abraham's life and how he might know that. So this is what I've learned about a lot of people, especially in the South. A lot of people in the South believe in God. If you ask people, hey, you believe in God? A lot of people believe in God. There are some people who don't, but a lot of people believe in God. But when you ask people, hey, do you trust God? People have a more difficult time responding to that question. Abraham, obviously, he believed in God, but he learned how to trust in God. I think that learning to trust God is a process. It doesn't just happen instantly. It takes time. And honestly, the hard part about learning to trust God is that normally it takes painful moments where we learn to trust God. And so Abraham, he learns this. And what is trust or what is faith in God or in anything? It's knowing, I'm okay with knowing later. Faith or trust is, I'm okay with knowing the why later. Even if I don't understand what's happening, God, I'm okay with knowing the why later. Even if I don't understand why this is happening right now, God, I'm okay with understanding or knowing the why later. Whether that's later 10 years from now or that's later when I get to heaven, I'm okay with knowing later. Does that mean we shouldn't pursue understanding? No, we should pursue understanding. We should pursue reading the Bible. We should pursue prayer. We should ask God, God, help us understand. God, help me understand what your word says. Help me understand how this applies to my life. Help me understand and make sense of what's happening around me. God, help me with those things. But even in all of that, if we don't get the why, faith comes into play and going, God, I still trust you. Genesis 15, verse 1, we find Abraham, and God gives him this promise. In verse 1, it says, sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram. His name was Abram, and then it got changed to Abraham. In a vision and said to him, do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eleazar of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit my wealth. What you've given me, no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir. And God makes it, see, when we see this, he's saying, hey, God, I don't even have someone that's going to inherit everything. God, like, you're giving me all these things, you're blessing me with all these things, but there's no one even to take on these things. And what God does next is God makes an attempt to help Abraham understand something. God does this with all of us, by the way. He makes attempts to say, hey, I know you don't get this, but let me help you. Let me show you. And sometimes we don't listen at all. Sometimes we try to listen and we're like, God, I still don't get it. And Abraham has a moment where God shows him something. And he says, hey, Abraham, I want you to understand what I'm doing. I want you to understand my promise. And in verse 4, it says, then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up to the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And so he brings Abram outside and he says, Abram, I want you to look at the stars in the sky. We live in Texas. We live in the country in Texas. The stars here are awesome. They're beautiful. We even have a song about it. And so this moment, he brings him out here and he shows him all the stars in the sky and says, Abraham, this is going to be your descendants. He's trying to help Abraham understand the moment. God does this with all of us. Sometimes, I won't say you are, but sometimes I'm too dense to understand the moment. I'm like, God, what are you doing? And he's going, look, pay attention. I'm showing you. And I'm like, God, what? I don't see it. What are you doing? I don't understand it. What are you doing? And what we find out in Abraham's life, if he's got his arm around us today and he's saying, hey, remember, God always does the right thing. I think there's a couple other taglines to this or a couple other points to this. And if you're taking notes today, here's the first one. God always does the right thing, even if it takes a long time. I don't know if you know this about God or not. He's notorious for taking a long time. Notorious for it. How many of you hate that? Me. I hate it. I hate it, hate it, hate it. I'm like, God, why does this take so long? God, what are you waiting on? God, this would be the perfect time. This would be it. This would be it. We're like, just God, please, right now. But he's notorious for taking a long time, or what seems to us like a long time. In Genesis 16, Abraham gets so tired of waiting on God that he decides, hey, we're going to make this happen on our own. So him and his wife Sarah, they're like, hey, God, you promised us an heir, but you haven't provided it yet. I don't know what you're waiting on, God. The perfect time has already passed. So now Sarah comes to Abraham in verse 1. It says this, chapter 16. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarah came to Abram. The Lord has prevented me from having children. I just want you to see this. She thinks God has prevented her, but really God has promised her. The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram, what was Abram thinking in this moment? I have no idea. Abram agreed with Sarah's proposal. Let me just say, any man in the room that agreed to that, you know better. Like, that was a dumb decision right there. Like, what was he thinking? He knew this was not going to turn out well. It didn't turn out well in so many ways, but he agreed to it. And so he goes and he has a son, and it creates all kinds of issues, as you can imagine. And this happens, but essentially what they were saying is, God, you're taking too long. And I think sometimes we're like, God, you're taking too long. God, we're 3.5 months into this pandemic, God. You could have shut it down about a month and a half ago. We'd have been good. The first couple of weeks of vacation were nice, but we're tired of this. Like, we don't want, God, you can stop playing right now. I'm sending my kids back to school. Like, we're not playing with this. Like, you're in that moment right now, and you're like, God, this is like, God, timing. This is good. Figure it out, please. And God's going, hey, 2 Peter 3:9, this verse, I hate this verse. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. You're not going to like it either. I was going to tell you ahead of time, but I want you to look at it with me. 2 Peter 3:9 says this, the Lord isn't really being slow about his promise, as some people think. No, he is being patient. Why? For your sake. He does not want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent. I don't know if you know this or not, but patience is a fruit of the Spirit of God. Patience is a part of God's character. Patience is something that God is trying to build into you and into me. And so he does that by being slow because he's teaching us patience. I hate that. I wish God didn't do that. But he does because he wants you and me to develop patience because it's a fruit of his Spirit. So God always does the right thing even when it takes a long time. Number 2, God always does the right thing even when it seems crazy. Even when it seems crazy. God waits until Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 89 years old before he's going to give them a baby. All the women in the room, you're like, nope, 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 nope. And all the men in the room are like, double nope. Nope, not happening. We're not doing that. But what happens here in Genesis 18:10, it says, then one of them said, I will return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening to this conversation from the tent. Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such a pleasure, especially with my master? My husband is also so old. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? Is anything too hard for God? And I just want to pose that question to you today. As we're going through some really interesting times, is there anything too hard for God? Is there anything too hard for God? And he says, I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah will have a son. And so even when it seems crazy, Romans 4, verse 19, Paul says this about Abraham. He says, and Abraham's faith did not weaken. Even though about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. Abraham was never wavered in believing God's promise. In fact, his faith grew stronger. His faith in the midst of this grew stronger. Wait a second. So you're telling me in order for my faith to grow stronger, I got to go through crazy things? Normally, yes. In order for my faith to grow stronger, I have to experience painful, God's timing things. Normally, yes. In order for my faith to grow stronger, I got to go through things that I don't understand. Normally, yes. That's part of faith. That's part of trusting as God. I don't understand. And then it causes us to rely on God. Because if we understood it all, it would just be like, hey, we're good. We don't need God. But when we don't understand it, we have to rely on God. It says his faith grew stronger. And in this, he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. Let me just say, no matter what's happening in this season, no matter what happens in future seasons, we serve a God that is able, even when it seems crazy. The third thing, God always does the right thing, even when it doesn't seem right. How many of you guys have ever been in a situation, maybe the current one, where it doesn't feel like God's doing the right thing? You're like, God, I think you missed this one. God, I don't think you see what's really happening. God, I don't think that I think you missed it. You ever have that moment? I've had that moment lots of times, and sometimes I vocalize it. I'm learning now not to vocalize it because God's like, Aaron, trust me, I see it. But even when it doesn't seem right, you see, there's a story in the Bible in Genesis 18 where God wanted to destroy the city of Sodom, but Abraham's nephew lived in Sodom, and so he's like, hey, God, wait, God, I know you want to destroy that city, but what you don't realize is my nephew lives there. That's not a good idea. That's not the right thing to do. And so he begins to question God, and he begins to ask all these things. He's like, God, what if there's this many righteous people? God, what if there's this many righteous people? And he talks God all the way down to just his family that's living there. And in verse 23, Genesis 18, it says, Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? He's questioning God. He's saying, God, why would you do this? God, this doesn't seem right. God, this seems wrong. And God's going, hey, I always do what is right, even when you don't think it's right. And so what happens in this, he starts questioning God. And let me just say, I don't think there's anything wrong with questioning God as long as you don't leave the conversation. This is how most of us question God. God, why would you do this? And then we turn around and we walk away, and we never give God time to respond and show us an answer. And so then we just think, well, God didn't help us. God just doing something wrong. He's not right. And we miss the fact that if we would have stayed in the conversation long enough, God would have shown us, he would have spoken to us, he would have given us some wisdom on why maybe something is happening. See, trust is only needed when you disagree. Think about that for a second. If you're married, you fully get this. Trust is only needed when you disagree. And when we disagree with God, when we're going, God, this isn't the right thing, that's when trust is important. We got to go, God, I still trust you, even though I don't think it's the right thing. Number 4, God always does the right thing, even if we don't understand. Even if we don't understand. This story, this last story we're going to look at, is the most popular story of Abraham's life. But what happens is kind of towards the end of his life, and Abraham in the beginning, he's like, God, how are you going to do this? And then he tries to figure it out on his own. He tries to go his own way. He tries to do his own thing. He makes it happen on his own, all these things. And he's like frustrated, going, God, why? He's questioning. He's complaining. His wife's laughing at God, and he's got all these things going on. But then this next story, when God asks something of him, he doesn't complain. He just jumps in and goes, okay, let's do it. Why does he do that? Because after years of hard moments, after years of struggling with the why, after years of navigating difficult seasons, he's finally learned to trust God. And this next story, Hebrews 11 says it really, really well. What happens is God tells Abraham, he says, hey, the son that I promised you, the one you finally had, his name is Isaac. At this point in time, he's about 17 years old. He says, Isaac, the only son you have, the one that's going to inherit everything, and the one that I promised you would be the one that all your descendants come from, that Isaac, I want you to go and sacrifice him. I want you to kill him. And so Abraham says, okay. And he takes his 16, 17-year-old son. They get the stuff together. They begin walking up this mountain to go, and Abraham's going to offer his son as a sacrifice. And there's a lot of backstory on why that happened. You can look at it later. But in this process, in this moment, Hebrews 11:17 tells us this. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Some of us sometimes wonder, will God test us? The answer to that question is absolutely 100% most of the time. God's constantly testing us. He's going, do you trust me? He tests us with our finances. He tests us with our families. He tests us with our social atmosphere. He tests us with internal things. He's testing us. Why? Because he wants us to grow stronger. It's the same thing that you do with your kids. You could do everything for your kids, and you can make it really easy for them, but you know if you do that when they get older, they're going to be useless. So you let them try things. You let them test things. Sometimes you even make it a little more difficult for them because you want them to grow. You want them to mature. You want them to become the young men and the young women that you want them to become, so that they're not living in your house at 40 years old. Like you want them to grow up and move out. And so you want them to grow and those types of things. And whenever God tests us, he's helping us grow. And so it says this. In this passage is testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promise, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. He's ready. He was going to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. In verse 19, it says, Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. Abraham had got to the point where he trusted God so much that he thought, I'm going to kill my son today, but God's going to raise him from the dead. That's actually what he thought in his brain was, I'm going to kill my son today, and then God's going to raise him from the dead. Thankfully, if you know the rest of the story, he didn't kill his son. He got to the top of the mountain, and he was going to sacrifice his son. It says he literally had a knife over his son. And in that process, God supplied another sacrifice. He stopped him and said, hey, Abraham, turn around. And there was a ram stuck in some bushes, essentially, and he went and got the ram, and he sacrificed the ram instead. But in the whole process, God's testing him and going, hey, do you trust me? Hey, do you trust me? Even when you don't understand, do you trust me? I was having a conversation a few weeks ago about this same story, and I was telling this person, we know this story. We know that God provided a way for Abraham not to have to sacrifice his son. But Abraham, the whole time he was walking up the mountain, he had no idea. He didn't know what was going to happen at the top of the mountain. It's kind of like us. We don't know what's going to happen next month with jobs, with schools. We don't know what's going to happen next week with government. We have no idea what's going to happen. We're just walking through the season day by day. We're just walking up the mountain moment by moment going, God, what are you going to ask me to do in the next season? God, what's going to happen? Who's going to make changes? What's going to happen next? And the whole time God's going, you're growing stronger. You're growing stronger. You're growing stronger. Keep trusting me. Keep trusting me. Keep trusting me. Stay close to me. And why? Because God always does the right thing. In Psalms 9, verse 10, it says this, those who know your name trust in you. Oh, Lord, do not abandon those who search for you. He's saying, hey, when you know God's name, whenever you know him, whenever you're close to him, you learn to trust him. Abraham learned to trust God because he grew close to God. You see, a lot of times we don't trust people that we're far from. But the closer you get to people, the more you trust them. And so he said, hey, when we know his name, we trust him. Why? Because God always does the right thing. There was a great theologian one time. He wrote a song, and in it the line said, thank God for unanswered prayers. His name was Garth Brooks, really good theologian. And in that line, in that song, how many of you have ever been like, I agree with that 100%. Thank you, God, for not answering that prayer. Because you saw later on that it was like, wow, that would have been terrible. That would have been a horrible thing. She's not near as attractive as I thought she was, whatever. And you're like, thank you, God, for not answering that prayer. And in that moment, you have these moments where we're like, God, okay, I trust you. But a lot of times we have this prereq that in order to follow God, I have to understand. And I'm not saying that with faith. We don't check our brains at the door. God gave you a brain for a reason. We don't check them at the door. We use our brains. But with faith, there is a moment where we have to go, you know what? Even when I don't understand, I still trust you. Because if it only comes down to what we understand, that means we reduce God to the size of our brains. And if we reduce God to the size of our brains, let me just be really honest, he's not a God worth following. If I can reason everything that he can do, then I don't need him. But if he goes and does things that are way above and way beyond my thoughts and way beyond my ways and way beyond things I'll ever comprehend, that's when I need him. That's when I can trust him. And so Abraham, he's learned to trust him. Two last things I think Abraham would say to us if he was like arm around us on the track today before he goes back to the stands. I think he would say this. Number one, I think he would say, don't make earth your permanent home. Don't make earth your permanent home. Hebrews 11:9 says this, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was a foreigner living in tents. Abraham, he didn't even set up a home where he went. He knew this wasn't his home. He wasn't going to spend all of his energy and all of his time investing in and worrying about the things of earth because he knew his home wasn't here. It says verse 10, Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. Abraham understood the principle that this is not our permanent home. We're passing through. We're living here for a season. We're living through a crazy season right now, but eventually we'll get to a permanent home, which is heaven. And he's saying, hey, make sure that in all of the living on earth, live well. Follow Jesus. Do these things. But just remember, this isn't your permanent location. This isn't your permanent home. And the second thing he would say to us is this: live with an eternal perspective in how we use our time and how we spend, how we invest our money. He would say, hey, make sure you have an eternal perspective. Remember that what you invest in on earth is all going to disappear one day. It's all going to go away one day. In our current economy, it may go away really quick soon. It's not going to last. But what you invest in heaven, the souls that you invest in that make it to heaven one day, those are going to last forever. And he said, hey, don't forget, have an eternal perspective. In verse 12, Hebrews 11, it says, and so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead. A nation with so many people that like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there was no way to count them. All these people died still believing what God had promised. They all died believing what God had promised. Abraham died with only one son. He died with one son, going, God, you promised me all these descendants, but I only have one son. But yet he still trusted God. Why did he do that? Because he understood that I have an eternal perspective, and I'm okay with seeing what God does from afar. I'm okay with going to heaven and then seeing what God does from afar because he had eternal perspective. That would be a really big bummer if you didn't have an eternal perspective. If you're like, God, you promised me all this stuff, but I didn't get any of it. God, you promised that I'd have all these things, but I got none of it. Maybe he didn't get it on earth, but he had an eternal perspective. And so when he got to heaven, he was like, hey, he saw it from the stands. And today, I think honestly, as he walks down in this moment, I think Abraham with his arm around us would go, hey, I get that this season's really hard. I get that this is really difficult. I get that you're uncertain. I get that there's a little bit of fear or a lot of fear in some of us. I get that you're wondering what's next. I get that you're struggling with some things. I get that you don't know the answer to a lot of things. I get that. But just listen to me today. Live life with an eternal perspective. Don't make this place your permanent home, and trust that God will always do the right thing, even when you don't understand, even when it seems crazy, even when it seems like it's taken a long time. He's still going to do the right thing, and he's going to strengthen you through it if you will turn to him. If you don't turn to him, then you're just going to be really frustrated, really cynical, really bitter. You're going to post a lot of things on social media that you probably shouldn't, and you're going to be really annoyed. But if you'll turn to him and you'll trust him, you're going to grow deeper in your faith. You're going to develop some deep roots. You're going to grow stronger in the man or woman of God that you are. You're going to disciple your family in strong ways. You're going to become a follower of Jesus, and you're going to practice it at another level through this season. But if you don't turn to him, you're just going to become really cynical and really bitter and really frustrated. And that's your choice. He's not going to make you do either one of those. That's your choice. Today, as we close out, I'm going to ask Aaron to come back up with me. As we close out, I just want to ask you kind of two questions. Remember, one is this: in this season, have you put your trust in God? Have you put your trust in God? Not do you believe in God? Again, we're in the South. A lot of people believe in God. Do you trust in God? Do you trust him? It's two totally different things. I think a lot of times it's easy to go, yeah, I believe in God, but then God goes, cool, then I want you to sacrifice your son. He doesn't ask us to do that, but he asked Abraham to do that, and Abraham said, okay, I trust you. Maybe for us, he's going, hey, do you trust me? I want you to sacrifice your business. Do you trust me? I want you to sacrifice a lot of your time. Do you trust me? I want you to sacrifice finances. Do you trust me? I want you to walk away from this relationship. Do you trust me? And God's asking us that question. He's going, do you trust me? Not do you believe in me? Do you trust me? And I think he's going, do you trust me? Are you willing to trust me even when the government mandates certain things? Are you willing to trust me even when we can't meet in a building as a church? Are you willing to trust me even whenever you have to wear a mask in public? Do you trust me? Do you trust me in those seasons? Do you trust me enough to put your faith in me, or are you going to put your faith in other things? And God's asking us that question in this season as we look at different lives throughout this series. That question is going to come back over and over again. Are we just believing in God, or are we trusting God? Are we just believing in God, or are we trusting in God? Because he always does the right thing, even when we don't understand. And today, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, I just want to say in this moment right now, whether you're watching online with us or you're here in the building, it's a moment for you to make a decision to give your life to Christ, to say, hey, I want to follow you. I want to give my life to you. And if you've never done that before, the same God that promised Abraham descendants is the same God who's present in this place today. He's present with you in your home today. If you're watching online, maybe in your kitchen, wherever you are, he's present today. And in this moment, you can say, you know what, God, I want to give my life to you. And if that's you and you want to do that, I say right now in this moment, as I pray here in a minute, all it takes is you saying, God, will you forgive me of my sins? I believe that your son Jesus came and died for me, and I want to give my life to you. That's where it starts. And then a relationship starts, and you get to know God. You get to have a relationship with God. And if you make that decision today, please, 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 if you're at home, you can text the word shirt to 97000 here in the room. There's a QR code on the seat back in front of you. Please scan that. Fill out that card today. We want to put a book called Following Jesus in your hands, and make sure that you get that. And for everybody else in the room or online, you say, man, Aaron, I haven't trusted God. I've the last 3 months, I don't know that I've trusted God. I've become frustrated. I've become cynical. I've been bitter. I've been stressed because I'm trying to control it and I don't understand it and I don't like the timing of it and it seems crazy and all these things, and God's going, but do you trust me? Do you trust that I'm going to do the right thing? Even if the government doesn't, even if education doesn't, even if my job doesn't, even if my boss doesn't, even if Aaron doesn't, do you trust me? That's what God's asking us today. Do you trust me? And maybe in this moment, as I pray, you just need to have a moment where you have a declaration. And let me just say, even if you have been trusting God, this is a good moment just to redeclare this. But if you haven't been trusting God, this is a moment for you to say, you know what, God? I'm going to declare today, I trust you. I trust you with every area of my life. I trust you in every season of my life. I trust you. Even when I don't understand, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it's frustrating, even when it's crazy, even when it doesn't seem like the right thing, I trust you. And as I pray, if you need to declare that, I want you to just declare with your voice, God, I trust you. Lord, we love you and we thank you today. And God, we declare as one church, online, in person, we declare we trust you. As a church, we trust you, regardless of what happens, regardless of how crazy it is, regardless of how impossible it seems, regardless of how frustrating it is, regardless of the timing, regardless of whatever, God, we're going to trust you. We're going to live with an eternal perspective. We're going to make sure that we don't make this place our permanent home, God, but we're going to trust that you have a greater home in store for us, God, but we're going to live a life that is fully trusting you. God, we love you, even when it doesn't make sense. We trust you even when it doesn't make sense. We trust you even when we can't see the end. We trust you in the process. God, I pray that our faith would grow deeper. Our faith would grow stronger. Our faith would grow deep roots in this season. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. I know it's a different type of atmosphere. I know we got you spread